Reporter walks into the gala, aiming to expose the myth behind Big Shaq's 90s attitude. One question lights the fire, but what follows isn't scandal, it's revelation. Big Shaq doesn't defend the mask. Big Shaq dismantles it, piece by piece, live and unfiltered. And when the response lands, the crowd isn't clapping for a comeback. They're witnessing a truth too powerful to ignore. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The ballroom pulsed with soft jazz and murmured pleasantries, clinking glasses and polished intentions floating beneath chandeliers that had seen more show than sincerity. Shaq stood in the wings of the stage, his massive frame quietly absorbing the low hum of wealth and charity promises. The Hearts in Motion Gala wasn't new to him. He'd sponsored it 3 years running. Smiles, handshakes, a few laughs too loud. It all played like reruns of a show he'd starred in but never wrote. Then came the voice. Not loud, not rude, just pointed, calculated. "Mr. O'Neal," it said, with that brand of casual urgency only reporters carry when they already know where they're going. Shaq turned. The reporter was young, white, no more than 30. Crisp gray suit, no tie, and a notebook in hand like it meant more than a mic ever could. His name tag read Callan Royce, and the tone of his voice wasn't curiosity. It was indictment wrapped in formality. "I wonder," Callan said, "when you look back at your image in the 90s, the way you carried yourself, the arrogance, the bravado, do you feel any regret for the message that sent to young black men trying to find their place in the world?" The clatter of forks died somewhere near the stage. Shaq didn't flinch, not visibly, but something tightened just beneath the surface, a coil winding quietly behind his ribs. He looked at Callan, not with anger, but with the kind of stillness that comes from holding back years of misread chapters. "You got a lot of nerve," he said slowly, "asking me that, but you ain't the first." Callan didn't back down. Maybe he thought this would be his moment. Pulling the curtain back on a legacy. Maybe he thought he was being brave. Shaq gave a nod to the host, signaling he'd be a moment longer. Then he stepped past the velvet curtain, away from the clapping hands, into a hallway that smelled like stage makeup and old wood polish. Callan followed, recorder on. Shaq didn't ask for it to be off. "You think I was supposed to be humble?" Shaq said, turning just enough to catch the young man in his peripheral. "Play nice? Make myself smaller so America felt better?" Callan opened his mouth, but Shaq kept going. "Let me tell you a story," he said, voice lowering. "Not for secrecy, but wait. I was 13 the first time I got stopped by cops in Newark. Just walkin', hands in my pockets. Big kid. Sure, but still a kid. They said I looked like someone they were looking for. My mama had to come down in her slippers, beg him to let me go. That night she said, 'You can't afford to be regular, baby. You gotta shine so bright they can't mistake you for anybody else.' So yeah, I was loud. I was bold. Because regular gets mistaken, regular gets buried." Callan's recorder clicked softly in his hand. "You weren't just bold," he said, careful now. "You were unreachable. To some people you seemed more like a product than a person." Shaq let that hang. "Funny thing about products," he said. "They don't bleed. But I did. Just nobody wanted to print that." The hallway stretched long behind them, light flickering slightly above a faded team photo from 2001. Shaq's younger face stared out from it, grinning, arms wide, as if nothing ever touched him but glory. "You ever had someone put a camera in your face while you're grieving?" Shaq asked. "Ever had to smile 2 minutes after your cousin dies because the press is waiting and they don't care?" Callan said nothing. Shaq didn't wait. "In 1995, I bought my mama a house in Orlando. Thought it was the best day of my life. That night, neighbor called the cops because she thought a black woman walking into a nice place meant a break-in. They came with hands on holsters. You think I should have whispered back then too?" Callan looked down, then up. "People just remember the dominance. The commercials. The money. The swagger. Some say you were a distraction from real struggle." Shaq leaned back against the wall, chuckling low. "A distraction," he repeated. "Let me tell you something, being black and joyful in public, that's resistance. Being excellent on a court that don't love you unless you win, that's a protest. I wasn't a distraction. I was a lighthouse." There was a beat of silence before Callan responded. But don't you think there's a generation now that's trying to unpack what was performance and what was pain? Shaq's eyes narrowed, not in threat, but calculation. You think I don't ask myself that every night? He said. You think I don't replay every joke I told on late-night shows? Every goofy moment they replayed more than my stats? You think I don't wonder if I let them turn me into something safe, so they wouldn't have to hear me say the word racism out loud? He paused, rubbed the bridge of his nose, voice quieter now. I wasn't supposed to be the hero. I was supposed to be the entertainment. Big man, big smile, big dunks. But that ain't the full story, and it never was. Callan's hand lowered the recorder now, the silence growing personal. He looked at Shaq, not the brand, not the headline, not the caricature, but the man, tired, strong, haunted by applause that came at the cost of nuance. So why talk about it now? He asked finally. Because I'm still here, Shaq said, and most of us don't get to rewrite our chapters while we're alive. There was movement behind the curtain, the host peeking in, reminding them it was time. But Shaq didn't move yet. You want to report something? He said to Callan. Report this truth. Don't always look the way you want it to. And sometimes the mask we wear ain't to fool you. It's to survive you. With that, he turned and walked onto the stage, where the crowd rose in warm applause. Cameras flashed, smiles widened. The moment smoothed out like nothing had been said. But back in that hallway, Callan stayed still, listening to the echoes of a story that didn't fit neatly in a headline. I still remember the day they branded me a monster. Not because I was, but because I didn't sit the way they wanted me to. It was February of '97, playoffs coming fast, locker room tense, bodies worn down, and egos wearing thinner. I'd just come off a rough game. Media was packed like sardines outside the door, hungry for sound bites. Sweat still clung to my skin, my knees ached, and I'd just been blamed for a loss I didn't single-handedly cause. But in this world, the big guy takes the hit, especially if he's black, loud, and unapologetic. That day, a young reporter from a regional outlet shoved a mic in my face before I'd even untaped my ankles. Asked something slick. Something about whether I cared enough about the team, or if I was just chasing personal records. I laughed, tired and wired. Not even a real laugh, just that kind of exhausted exhale you give when you know they came in looking for smoke. I said something like, "Y'all always want a story. Here, make this one up." I waved them off. I didn't cuss. I didn't threaten. But by morning the headlines were boiling. Shaq's locker room meltdown, arrogance or apathy. They didn't print the part where 2 minutes earlier, I was sitting with our rookie, talking him through a bad shooting night. They didn't show the footage of me handing off my shoes to a kid in a wheelchair before I even got to the tunnel. They clipped what was loud. They clipped what would trend. I learned that day the camera never catches the full room. It only catches the noise. What made it worse was watching the story mutate. Suddenly, I wasn't just an athlete having a rough night. I was a problem. Talk shows ran with it. Former players dissected my attitude. One called me a dangerous role model for young black men. That part stuck like a rusty nail. Like success came with a gag order, and if you didn't smile sweet and speak soft, you weren't just flawed, you were a threat. I sat at home, lights off, TV humming in the background while they debated my worth like I was a policy, and not a person. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. It wasn't about truth. It was about confirmation. They wanted me to be a type. The loud one. The showboat. The brute in size and speech. It made their job easier. Made the world neater. And the audience? They didn't want reality. They wanted roles. I tried to shake it. I told myself it'd pass. Like most media flares do. But it lingered. Sponsors asked me to soften the image. Teammates gave me side eyes. Like I'd brought shame to the locker room. No one asked what I meant by make it up. No one asked what I was going through. They just printed, played, and reposted. The fallout wasn't physical, but it was surgical. And it cut deep. Now, years later, that same narrative still echoes. Just from different mouths.
Callan Royce. That's the kid who came at me at the gala. He wasn't even born when that locker room circus happened, but he carries its residue like he lived it. I've seen his work, tight edits, hard leads, and that smug sort of crusader tone young journalists get when they think they've uncovered a monster and plan to slay it for the good of the masses.
He's good. I'll give him that. Too good. The type who believes being provocative is being brave. He came up fast, got recognition for exposing some corrupt college recruiting scandal, then pivoted to cultural criticism. His specialty, dismantling public black figures, who in his view served stereotypes. His whole mission is to deconstruct what he calls the showman virus, the idea that black athletes had to entertain louder, smile bigger, dominate more just to earn their seat.
I get it.
In theory. But what he doesn't get, or won't admit, is that survival doesn't always come dressed in dignity. Sometimes it comes in overcompensation, in volume, in laughter that masks fatigue, in gold chains that say I made it, because no one else will. He doesn't understand the air we were breathing back then. Doesn't understand that in the 90s, you couldn't just be excellent, you had to be undeniable, had to become myth to stay in the room. The first piece Callan ever wrote, that mentioned me, was titled, The Smile That Sold Silence. He claimed my charisma in commercials, and my larger-than-life branding, helped corporations package blackness into something digestible, something safe. Said I made it harder for athletes who came after to speak openly about injustice without being labeled difficult. He praised Kaepernick in one paragraph, and condemned me in the next. I didn't respond. What was the point? I've played through worse than words. But he kept coming, circling like a shark, who smelled performance instead of blood. The irony is, he's doing exactly what he blames me for, reducing complexity into a bite-sized narrative. Only this time, I'm the cautionary tale, instead of the champion. At the gala, when he threw that question at me in front of the curtain, it wasn't about curiosity. It was theater. He came to provoke, to dig for a soundbite that confirmed his thesis. But when I didn't bite, when I peeled the layers back instead, I saw it in his eyes, hesitation, a crack in the confidence. And that crack grew when I told him about that 97 locker room. When I gave him the name of the rookie I mentored that night, the footage that was buried, the segment that was never aired because it didn't match the outrage the network wanted. He didn't expect me to have receipt. He expected me to dodge. But I don't run from shadows. I've lived too long in their company. Callan asked me for an interview the day after the gala. Said he wanted the real story. I said no, told him if he wanted the truth he'd have to sit with it, not just record it. That threw him. He asked what that meant. I said it meant going where the cameras didn't, watching the tapes that never aired, talking to the people who saw me when the lights weren't on. He's young, but not stupid. He took the challenge. Next thing I know, he's at the old ESPN Archive Center digging through forgotten reels. I don't expect him to change, but I do expect him to see. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Because this ain't just about me. This is about how we frame people. How we choose the angle that fits our bias and ignore the ones that challenge us. I became the poster boy for arrogance. Not because I was, but because I refused to beg for grace. And now, years later, the echo chamber still spins, still feeds on fragments. But I'm still standing. The truth is quieter than headlines. It moves slow. It doesn't sell as fast as scandal or swagger. But once it shows up, it doesn't leave. And maybe that's why Callan keeps coming back. Because somewhere deep down, he's starting to suspect the story he wants to tell isn't the one that's true. It was the summer of 2000 when I learned that money couldn't buy peace, couldn't buy humanity, either. I just closed on my second property in Florida, a waterfront place I bought so my mother could be close to the ocean, like she always dreamed. I was riding high back then, endorsements stacking, Lakers dominating, and everybody calling me unstoppable. I should have felt invincible. But that day reminded me, I was just a black man in America with a spotlight on his chest and a target on his back. The country club sat off a winding road just north of Boca Raton, surrounded by palm trees too perfectly trimmed, and silence too carefully curated. I wasn't even going to play that day, just check out the place. I'd been invited. At least I thought I had. My financial advisor, who was white and 10 years older, had been a member there and said he'd put in a good word. I'd sent in the paperwork. The initiation check had already been cashed, but none of that mattered when I pulled up to the gate. The security guard, mid-50s, name tag said Frank, walked up to my window and squinted. Didn't say hello. Didn't smile. Just looked like he was trying to figure out how I'd gotten past the guardhouse in the first place. I told him my name, told him I had a meeting with the club manager. His eyes didn't blink. He leaned in and said, "We've had some concerns about your application. We'll need you to leave the property until those are sorted." I asked what kind of concerns. He said he couldn't discuss that. Said I'd need to contact the office. Said it with the flatness of someone reading off a script. But the cold in his voice wasn't rehearsed. It was too familiar. I didn't yell, didn't press. I just sat there a moment, engine humming low, and realized I wasn't being mistaken for someone else. He knew exactly who I was, and that was the problem. I backed the car out slow, careful not to spin gravel. When I got back to the main road, I pulled over, not because I was lost, but because something in me cracked. Not rage. No, I'd felt that too many times before to flinch. It was something deeper, like grief, like remembering a rule you keep trying to rewrite. You can't outgrow racism. You just meet it in more expensive rooms. That moment followed me for months. I didn't talk about it, didn't want to give it air, but it changed something. I realized people saw my face on billboards, my smile in commercials, my stats in the rafters, but they still didn't see me. They saw what I represented, what they projected. To some I was the dream, to others the warning, but never the man. That's when I started building the persona. You know the one, Big Shaq the Joker, the life of the press conference. I made them laugh so they wouldn't ask questions. I gave them loud, because silence had only gotten me ignored. I leaned into it not because I loved it, but because it worked. It let me control the narrative, even if only on the surface. You see, there's a twisted kind of safety in becoming what they expect, so long as you stay one step ahead of their disappointment. But the problem with masks is, after a while, you start forgetting where your skin ends, and the performance begins. I'd go from joking with reporters to sitting alone in the locker room after everyone left, wondering if the laughter was a costume or a crutch. I used to think being known was the goal. Turns out, being understood is the real victory, and I was nowhere close. There was this night, not long after the country club incident, where I was hosting a private charity dinner, low-key, no cameras, just me, some local teachers, and a few scholarship recipients. One of the kids, a high school junior named Dante, pulled me aside. He said, "Mr. O'Neal, I look up to you because you're not afraid to be yourself." I nodded, smiled, said thank you. But inside it twisted me up. Because in that moment, I didn't know who that self was anymore. Was I the guy who dunked with swagger and cracked jokes on late-night TV? Or the one who cried in his car after being turned away from a building he'd already paid to enter? Was I the hero, the clown, the role model, or the threat? America didn't want me to be complex. They wanted simple, digestible, entertaining. But I am a man carved from contradictions. Joyful and weary, loud and careful, powerful and still at risk. They called me loud, but never asked what it cost to stay heard in rooms that would rather erase you. And it's not just me. Every black athlete, artist, leader, I've seen them carry that same dual burden. Be more than excellent, but never too bold. Be proud, but not political. Be visible, but not too real. I remember watching footage of Muhammad Ali when I was a kid, mesmerized by how free he was, how defiant. But then I grew up and realized how much they hated him for that freedom, how they tried to strip it from him, one soundbite at a time. They celebrate you in hindsight. In real time, they just want you tamed. I talk to young players now, some just coming into the league, and I hear the same anxiety in their voices I once buried in mine. They ask me how to stay marketable without losing themselves, how to speak out without getting labeled. I tell them the truth. You won't always win that fight. Sometimes you'll get painted with a brush that ain't yours. But don't let it stop you from picking up your own pen, because being silent never saved me. It only delayed the misunderstanding. That country club never sent an apology. They refunded my check 6 weeks later, with a blank note. No explanation, no offer to reapply. Just the subtle reminder that I didn't belong. Not really. Not in their eyes. And maybe I never would. But here's what they couldn't take. My story. And stories don't need approval. They need to be told. So now, when they call me loud, I say thank you, because it means I'm no longer asking permission to exist. There's a moment when the mirror stops lying to you, when the costume you wore for the crowd no longer fits your bones, and the weight of pretending grows heavier than the applause it earns. For me, that moment came on the set of a cereal commercial, in the spring of 2003. A crew of 25, 3 cameras, one bouncing basketball and a forced smile I'd worn so often, it practically had its own agent. The director yelled, "Action," and I dunked into the scene, cracking a punchline so rehearsed it didn't even sound like me anymore. Everyone laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I was Shaq. That's what I did. Be big, be loud, be lovable, and I hated every second of it. You don't realize you're wearing a mask until you try to take it off and nothing's underneath but silence. That day between takes, I sat in my trailer, staring at a mirror lined with light bulbs, the kind meant to make anyone look radiant. But all I saw was fatigue, layers of it buried beneath years of market-tested charm. That's when I knew I wasn't just playing the role. I'd been consumed by it. Back in the early 2000s, I had corporate suits buzzing around me like bees to syrup. Branding execs, image managers, PR architects, they all had opinions. They didn't just want me to be successful, they wanted me to be familiar. Not just a basketball player but a cartoon. The gentle giant, the walking punchline, the marketable myth. They'd say things like, "America loves when you're funny, Shaq. Don't be too serious." Or "Let's not get political. You're our safe guy." Safe. That word became a leash.
I'd sit in meetings where they'd storyboard my personality, choosing what aspects of me to highlight based on demographics.
Turn up the humor, be more animated. Don't talk about race or injustice. It divides markets. They didn't say those words outright, of course. They used softer ones. Broad appeal, relatable tone, family-friendly image. But I heard the truth between the lines. Be a fantasy, not a myth. The pressure was constant. Even my commercials had rules. Never look too serious. Never challenge the script. Always be the guy people wanted to laugh with, not think about. I went along with it. At first, the money was good. The opportunities piled up. But every time I leaned into that loud, goofy image, I felt something inside me shrinking. The real me, the quiet, thoughtful, sometimes solemn man, started disappearing beneath the caricature. And what's worse, I helped build the mask. I gave them material, played the role, turned press conferences into stand-up routines. But not because I loved it, because I knew the world feared what it didn't understand. And a 7'1", 345-pound black man speaking softly about pain, that's not what sold sneakers. But jokes? Jokes kept them clapping. All the while there were moments I wanted to speak out. Times I wanted to say what really kept me up at night. But I'd remember what happened to others who did. The backlash, the dropped sponsors, the way their truth got drowned in think pieces and edited segments. So I stayed in the costume until it nearly buried me. Now here comes Callan Royce. Young, sharp, ready to draw blood. He thinks he's peeling the mask off me for the first time. Thinks he's revealing something I've tried to hide. What he doesn't know is, I've been trying to bury that version of myself for years. I heard from one of my old contacts that Callan's been gathering clips. Old interviews, commercials, outtakes from shows where I cracked jokes while dodging real questions. Word is he's working on an exposé. A piece called The Manufactured Giant. Harsh title, but I can't lie, if I were him, I might have thought the same. Callan thinks I played into stereotypes. That I became the friendly mascot white America could cheer for while keeping their real feelings about race untouched. He's not entirely wrong, but he's not entirely right either. What he doesn't understand is how survival sometimes looks like surrender. How playing the clown can be the only way to stay in the room. It's not always selling out. Sometimes it's staying alive. But something shifted this week. He got his hands on raw footage from a 2001 interview, one that never aired. In it, I was sitting down with a small local channel after a youth basketball camp in Dallas. The cameras were rolling before the segment officially began. The interviewer asked, off the cuff, if I ever felt used by the media. And I said without thinking, every damn day. But I smile so my mama don't cry. Then the real interview started. And I put the smile back on. That clip never aired. Probably shelved because it didn't fit the image. Too real. Too raw. But Callan found it. And it's been eating at him. I can tell. We met again. This time at a small cafe in Inglewood. Neutral ground. He didn't come with a camera crew or a recorder. Just a notebook and questions. Real ones this time. Not for shock. Not for scandal. For understanding. The mask had cracked. And for the first time he didn't look like a reporter trying to expose a fraud. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle. You ever think, he asked me, slowly, that maybe we didn't give you space to be human because we were too busy needing you to be iconic? I didn't answer right away. Just let the question sit between us like a wound. Neither of us stitched. Yeah, I finally said, but I also didn't fight hard enough to take that space back. He nodded. Scribbled something. Then stopped. I thought I came here to take you down, he said. But now I'm starting to think the mask wasn't your weapon. It was your shield. I didn't smile. Didn't joke. Just looked him in the eye and said, "You want a monster? I'll show you the mask. But if you're gonna wear it in your story, make sure you tell him who built it, and why I had to wear it." He closed the notebook. No snappy comebacks. No smugness. Just silence. The good kind. The kind that makes room for truth. We sat there a while longer. No cameras. No headlines. Just two men, one who wore the mask, and one who was starting to understand what it cost. It came in a worn blue envelope, postmarked 2 decades ago but never sent, tucked between tax documents and old game tapes in a battered storage bin. Shawnee had finally convinced me to clean out. The edges were frayed. The ink faded just enough to show time had tried to erase it. But Lucille's name was there in that familiar looping script. Shaquille O'Neal, it read, full name and all, just like she'd say when I forgot to take the trash out. As a boy or when I stood too proud after a win, thinking I was invincible. I stared at it a while, thumb grazing the crease like it might open a trapdoor to another year. The letter had no stamp, no address on the outside, just my name. A message written, sealed, then hidden, maybe for good reason, but I opened it anyway.
Maybe if you ever read this, I want you to know I wrote it not out of disappointment but out of heartbreak. Not yours.
Mine. I stopped reading. Just sat there, floor cool beneath me, a pile of old jerseys to one side, an untouched water bottle on the other. My mama never minced words. When she loved, it was bold. When she hurt, it came wrapped in that same strength. I'd always thought she protected me with prayer and presence, but I never thought about what she had to swallow while the world picked me apart like a product on display. I started again. I see what they say about you. On the television, in the papers, even in the grocery store lines. When they think I'm just another woman with a cart full of coupons, they say you're arrogant, that you smile too much, talk too loud, take up too much space. But they don't know what I know. They don't know that boy who used to cry when his shoes got too tight, but didn't want me to worry because rent was due. They don't know how you carried your cousins when their daddy left. They don't know you at all. By the third paragraph, I couldn't sit anymore. I stood up, the letter still in my hands, pacing the room like I used to walk the court, measured, trying to stay in rhythm when everything inside was chaos. She wrote about the night I got benched, after clashing with a coach over a play they blamed me for. I remember the headline the next morning. Shaq thinks he's bigger than the team. She remembered it too, but not the media frenzy. What she remembered was hearing my voice on the phone, low and cracked, pretending I had a cold because I didn't want her to hear the shame. They don't know how it felt for you to be a man on television but still my baby when the cameras went off. They only see your size, your voice, your victories. They don't see your spirit. I sat back down, slower this time. There was weight in every sentence, not the kind that crushes, but the kind that makes you still, makes you reckon. Lucille talked about how hard it was to stand in the shadows while the world cheered and tore me down at the same time. How sometimes she wanted to scream during interviews, to grab the mic and say, "That's not all he is." But she knew they wouldn't listen, not to anyone who wasn't spinning the same narrative they already wrote. They don't understand what it means to be a black mother of a black son in America, let alone one they put on every screen, but still refuse to really see. I prayed, baby, every night, not for you to win games, but to come home whole. That one hit different. Because there were nights I didn't come home whole. Nights I left parts of myself on court floors, in green rooms, at press conferences, where the only rule was smile wider and say less. Nights I came home to a mirror and didn't recognize the man waving back. I kept the game face on for everyone. Coaches, fans, the league, but especially for her. Because Lucille O'Neal deserved a son who looked untouchable. She deserved peace. And somewhere along the line, I convinced myself that being untouchable was the only way to give it to her. But this letter, this was her telling me, she didn't want the illusion. She wanted the man underneath it. She ended it simply. One day, when the lights go down and the world isn't clapping so loud, I hope you find your way back to the boy who just wanted to be seen for who he was, not who they paid you to be. I love you more than they'll ever understand. Mama. I folded the letter carefully, like it might fall apart if I blinked wrong. My chest was tight, but not from grief, from recognition, from finally hearing something I hadn't let myself hear in years. That letter forced me to look in the mirror with different eyes. Not the eyes of a brand, a mogul, or a franchise centerpiece, but as a son, a man, and most importantly, a human being still learning how to be soft in a world that rewards armor. Being America's entertainment came with a price. They loved my jokes, my dunks, my dance moves. But empathy, that wasn't in the contract. When I spoke up about inequity, I was told to stay in my lane. When I sat out games for mental rest, I was called lazy. When I wept for a teammate's loss, they called it off-brand. Somewhere in the mix I learned that giving people what they wanted meant they rarely saw what I needed. Lucille knew. She always did. And she put it in writing, even if she couldn't bring herself to send it. I told Mamara about the letter later that night. We sat outside on the patio, the Florida air thick with ocean breath. She was scrolling on her phone, earbuds in, but I asked her to pause. Told her I wanted to share something her grandma once wrote me. I read it aloud. No edits, no summaries. When I finished, she didn't say much at first. Just sat with it. Then she said, "I didn't know Grandma saw all that." I said she saw everything, baby. Even the parts I thought I was hiding. She looked at me, eyes clear and knowing, the way kids do when they're still deciding what kind of adults they want to become. "I see it too," she said. "Not all of it, but enough." That's when I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It never was. I've been told my whole life that strength means silence, that dignity means endurance. But Lucille's letter reminded me that survival isn't the goal. Wholeness is. And wholeness starts with being seen, not for what you produce, but for who you are when the stadium's empty and the mask is off. So I keep that letter now. Not in a drawer, not in storage, but right above my desk, framed in glass. A reminder that the world may only catch the highlight reel, but my truth is much deeper than that. And it's not just mine to carry anymore. It's a legacy, one passed down in letters unsent, but never unread. The archive room was colder than Callan expected. Not just the temperature, though. The air conditioning was relentless, but the atmosphere itself, sterile, distant, like even the shelves didn't want to remember what was buried in them. Stacks of unlabeled tapes, cardboard boxes with marker-scrawled dates, and plastic tubs full of cables and lost context. He'd spent hours combing through it all, chasing a shadow of a moment he didn't fully believe existed until a retired producer named Janice pointed him toward an unmarked Beta SP tape buried beneath a stack, labeled NBA promotional spots. "It was never supposed to air," she'd said with a shrug. "Didn't fit the narrative." Now he slid the tape into the deck, watching as the screen flickered from blue to static to shaky footage. No audio at first. Just images. Shaquille O'Neal, 26 years old. In a gym that had seen better decades, fluorescent lights buzzed above peeling linoleum. The place looked like an afterthought, one of those underfunded community centers tucked between forgotten neighborhoods and fading promises. But the frame was tight on Shaq, hunched over a boy no older than 9, who clutched a framed photo like it might crumble if he let go. Callan leaned in. The camera operator must have been hiding behind a stack of folded bleachers. This wasn't staged. No crowd. No microphones. No PR rep in sight. Just Shaq kneeling on the floor, one massive hand on the boy's shoulder, the other gently lifting the photo toward him. The boy was crying, head down, lips moving but no words caught on the grainy footage. Still, the moment pulsed with clarity. Even through tape hiss and low resolution, the humanity screamed louder than any promo reel ever could. Then came the audio. Low, muffled, but there. "You don't have to be strong today," Shaq said softly. "You're allowed to break, lil man. That don't make you weak." The boy's name, according to a time-stamped note Janice had scribbled in the case, was Derek Langley. His father had died in a robbery just weeks earlier. Shaq had heard about it through a foundation letter and asked for the address privately. No press, no announcement, just showed up at the gym one morning before the team's practice, while the building was still empty. In the video, Derek leaned into Shaq's chest, the photo still in his hands, and Shaq didn't flinch. He didn't glance around like someone waiting for the cameras to catch it. He just wrapped those massive arms around the boy and held him like he was anchoring the whole damn world. Callan felt something twist in his chest. Something sharp. This wasn't a PR stunt. This wasn't the animated giant he'd studied in highlight reels and loud interviews. This wasn't a brand. It was a man. A real one. And for the first time, Callan felt the full weight of what he'd missed. Not just what he missed, but what they all had, Everyone who'd ever boiled Shaq down to punchlines and sneaker deals, to Gatorade commercials and goofball moments on TV sets. He watched the footage twice, then a third time without taking notes, just watching, absorbing, and somewhere during that final replay, a quiet guilt settled in his stomach, the kind that doesn't shout, but lingers like a whisper you can't forget. Janice came back with coffee. "You found it," she said, not asking but knowing. Cullen nodded. "Why didn't it ever air?" She took a slow sip. "Didn't test well. Focus groups liked him loud, not emotional. Networks wanted energy, not empathy. The footage didn't match the product." Cullen looked at her, stunned. He wasn't a product. He was a person. Janice raised an eyebrow. "Took you long enough." Cullen left the building with a mind racing faster than the skyline he barely noticed on the drive back. The footage played on repeat in his head. Shaq's voice, the boy's tears, the silence afterward, thicker than any edit could handle. He thought about every hit piece he'd ever skimmed, every criticism he'd thrown Shaq's way with the detached confidence of someone who believed observation was the same as understanding. He'd been wrong. And it wasn't just this footage, it was the pattern, the way the media rewarded spectacle, demanded simplicity, and punished complexity. If you were a black man in the spotlight, you could either be a hero or a villain, but never a full, breathing person. If you tried to be both, they'd choose whichever one sold better. Cullen sat in his apartment that night, surrounded by printouts and notes and half-written outlines for the exposé he thought he was going to write. The article titled "The Manufactured Giant" sat in his drafts blinking at him like a lie waiting to be published. He opened a new document. Not to redeem Shaq. Shaq didn't need redemption. Not from him. Not from anyone. What he needed was the truth. Not the kind spun into drama or chopped into digestible sound bites, but the messy, complicated human truth. The footage would be the anchor, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, and real was the one thing missing from every version of Shaq the public thought they knew. Cullen called his editor the next morning, told her the story was changing. She pushed back, told him the original angle had heat. He told her heat wasn't the goal anymore. Humanity was. He went back to the footage again and again, over the next few days, pulling details from the edges, the way Shaq looked at the boy, the way he didn't rush the moment, the way he seemed to understand something deeper than grief, like he'd lived it too. Maybe not the same way, but close enough to know what not to say, and what absolutely needed to be said. And suddenly the pieces started clicking. Shaq's volume wasn't vanity, it was armor. His humor wasn't escape, it was translation, his way of making pain safe enough for the world to swallow. His brand wasn't a choice, it was a survival strategy, in a system that demanded performance before personhood. Cullen began rewriting everything. And in doing so, he rewrote part of himself. The sharp edges of judgment dulled. The righteous certainty he'd clung to as a young reporter began to soften into something more valuable. Empathy. Because the camera only ever caught the noise. But the silence, the moments when nobody was watching, that's where the truth lived. And now, for the first time, Cullen wasn't just listening. He was ready to see. It was a Sunday afternoon when the question landed. No press, no stage, no media storm. Just me, Mimara, and the soft hum of a backyard breeze that didn't know what was coming. She was sitting across from me on the patio, legs crossed, braids tied back with a purple band, scrolling through something on her phone with that blank expression kids get when they're reading, but don't want to show emotion. I'd just come back from a youth mentorship event downtown, and we were both eating leftover ribs, paper plates balancing on our knees like we were holding on to the last bit of the weekend. Then she asked it, "Dad, why do some people online say you're a sellout?" It didn't come with attitude, no edge in her voice. She said it the way kids ask why the sky's blue, or why dogs can't talk, pure, direct, and completely unaware of the slow explosion that kind of question can start in a father's chest. I didn't answer right away, just looked at her for a second, 15, maybe 20 years old, in that moment, even though she was only 16. She had that same squint Lucille used to give me when she was trying to see past my words, and suddenly the ribs didn't matter anymore. "Where'd you see that?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Twitter." Some old clips were going around. A video of you joking on some talk show. People were saying stuff like, "You made black men look like clowns, like you were too loud, too safe for white folks." I didn't really get it. I mean, I laughed. But then I read the comments. I don't know. It just made me feel weird. She paused and put her phone down. Like even holding it was too heavy now. I just want to know, are you? There it was. Not a dagger, a mirror. And what I saw in it wasn't shame. It was doubt I hadn't faced in years. I took a breath, slow and deep, the kind that tries to buy time while your mind rewrites the answer you were about to give. I wanted to dismiss it, to say, people talk, or they don't know the real me. But that would have been the easy out. And Mimera didn't deserve easy. She deserved real. You know what a sellout is? I finally asked. She nodded. Someone who forgets where they came from. Who changes to fit in. I smiled faintly. That's what they say. But sometimes, people think you sold out just because you didn't play the role they expected. She tilted her head. What role did they want you to play? And that was the question that cracked something open in me. I didn't know was still sealed. They wanted me angry, but not too angry. Powerful, but not too proud. Funny, but not political. They wanted me to speak, but only about what made them comfortable. They wanted the big guy, the lovable giant. But they didn't want the full man. And any time I stepped outside that box, it got quiet real fast. I looked out toward the fence line where the shadows stretched long against the grass. There were times I leaned into it. The jokes, the commercials, the big laugh. Not because I didn't know who I was, but because I knew the world wouldn't accept me if I didn't play the game. She was quiet, listening like I was telling a story that didn't end with applause. That's when I realized this wasn't about her understanding the internet. It was about her understanding me. The whole me. Miara, I said slowly. I did what I thought would protect you. I made people laugh so they wouldn't fear me. I kept things light, because the weight of being fully seen as a black man in this country, that weight breaks you if you carry it alone. Her face softened, but she didn't let go of the question. Do you think it worked? I blinked.
What?
The protection. Did it work? That hit harder than I was ready for. I looked at her. Really looked. Her skin, her eyes, the strength in her voice, but also the fear that hid beneath it. The fear that maybe no matter what mask I wore, no matter how much money I made or how many causes I backed, the world would still look at her and decide before she ever opened her mouth. I thought it would. I said, each word a confession. I thought if I showed the world I wasn't a threat, if I gave them enough to laugh at, enough to buy into, they'd go easier on you, on your brothers. But the truth is, I don't know. She nodded, more adult in that moment than I'd ever been on a court. I think people don't want you to be one thing, she said. They just want you to be honest, even if it makes them uncomfortable. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Then I got some work to do. She smiled. We all do. Later that night, after she went inside and the stars started to scatter overhead, I stayed in that chair a while, thinking, replaying every moment. I laughed when I wanted to scream. Every endorsement I signed, when I should have walked away. Every time I played the safe version of myself because I believed survival meant silence in disguise. I thought about how I taught my kids to be polite, to be smart, to be twice as good, but I never taught them how to be free, because I never figured that out for myself. Miura's question wasn't just about me, it was about them, about this world, about the way we raise our kids to outmaneuver a system, instead of daring to change it, about the way we wrap them in pride, and still hope it's enough to shield them from a reality that doesn't care who their father is. That night, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I started writing something I wasn't sure anyone would ever read. It began with a single line. I wore the mask to protect you, but maybe it was time to let you see my face. I didn't have the answers yet. But I had the question now, and that was a start. Because a week ago he watched that forgotten footage from 1998, and it gutted him. Not because it showed something new, but because it showed what the world had refused to see all along. Shaq, raw and unfiltered, comforting a grieving boy in a dusty gym without cameras, microphones, or applause. That scene alone had more weight than anything Callan had ever said with a microphone in his hand. He rewrote everything. No sensationalism. No judgment. Just truth. He cleared his throat as the teleprompter rolled, not with the words he wrote for his old story, but with something newer. Something riskier. Something real. Good evening, Callan said, voice steady but edged with vulnerability. Tonight's segment isn't the story I planned to tell. It's the one I needed to tell. Behind him, The screen lit up, black and white footage slowly sharpening into the scene. Shaq kneeling beside young Derek Langley, both figures silhouetted in the dim gym light. The raw video, never aired before, now spilled out in front of millions. There's a clip you're seeing now. This moment happened in 1998, in a gym far from any spotlight. You've never seen it because it wasn't meant to sell shoes or make headlines. It didn't test well with focus groups. It wasn't considered on-brand. It didn't fit the version of Shaquille O'Neal the media, including myself, sold to you. The footage played in full.
No edits?
No voiceover. Just the sound of quiet grief, and a man holding space for it. Colin sat silently while the clip ran, letting it speak louder than any commentary could. And when it ended, he leaned forward into the lens, as if trying to reach through it. For years we've fed you a simplified version of greatness. We told you Shaq was loud, funny, marketable. We called him a clown, a mascot, a walking logo. But we didn't tell you about the weight he carried behind that smile. We didn't ask what it cost him to be safe for us, and I didn't ask what it cost me to never question it. He paused. Then, I was wrong. The feed cut to a wide shot. The newsroom behind him stilled. The phones, already ringing with early reactions, began to light up like Christmas. Twitter exploded before the segment ended. Shaq was more trended in 30 minutes. Clips from the broadcast were sliced, reposted, captioned, debated. Some praised Callan's bravery. Some called it pandering. Others, louder, angrier, claimed the footage was staged, manufactured, too little too late. One tweet said, Shaq sold out and this doesn't erase it. But the shift had started. Shaq hadn't spoken publicly about the footage. Not yet. But Callan knew the man was watching. Had to be. He didn't reach out. He wanted to give him space. But he did send one message. Short, and without punctuation. You deserved better. He didn't expect a reply. He got one an hour later. It said, took me a while to believe that too. That was all. But it was enough. By morning, debates were spilling from screens to sidewalks. Morning talk shows cut their celebrity gossip segments short to rerun the footage. Sports radio callers broke down crying on air. Think pieces flooded every blog and publication, each one trying to make sense of what this moment meant. But in the eye of the storm stood a man who hadn't said a word on camera. Shaq remained silent, watching it all from a distance. Then the leak hit. An anonymous user posted screenshots on a message board. Then to Reddit, then to Twitter, handwritten letters, dated between 1999 and 2004. They weren't scandalous in the way tabloids love. But they were personal. Letters Shaq had written to himself. Notes. Journal entries. Most of them unsent. All of them brutally honest. In one he wrote, I made them laugh again. They laughed while I was crumbling. Why do they need me to be less to feel more? In another, I miss silence. Not just the absence of noise, the kind that lets you hear your own truth without drowning. And in the most reposted line of them all, what if I've made a career out of protecting people from the parts of me they were never strong enough to meet? Colin read every word, and with each one, he felt the fire he'd lit on air grow into something much bigger. This wasn't just about one man. It was about a system, a mirror held to the media, to the public, to a culture that grooms black greatness into palatable pieces. Loud, lovable, but never too complex, never too angry, never too real. He appeared back on air the next night, a live panel waiting, loaded with sports analysts, media critics, and one former NBA coach. The debate was inevitable. Some defended the image Shaq had curated. Some said it was all manipulation. But Callan cut through the noise. What do we do, he asked quietly, when the mask becomes more comfortable than the truth? Not just for the person wearing it, but for the people watching. No one had an answer, because there wasn't a clean one. Shaq finally broke his silence 3 days later. Not on TV, not through a press release, but with a single Instagram post. A photo of him in that old gym. No caption, just that. And beneath it in the comments, thousands of messages poured in, some apologies, some praise, some still clinging to the old story. But the tone had changed. People were seeing him now. Not as a mascot, not as a myth, but as a man who'd spent decades balancing applause and exhaustion. A man who never stopped holding up others while the world pulled at his foundation. Colin knew it wasn't over. The fire had started, but whether it cleansed or consumed, that was still undecided. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. Because for once Shaquille O'Neal wasn't being told who he was. He was being heard, The decision wasn't made in a boardroom or through a lawyer's drafted statement. It wasn't strategized or rehearsed. No committee, no brand alignment meetings, no soft rollout. Just me sitting at the kitchen table one morning, an untouched glass of orange juice sweating on the wood, and the hum of headlines vibrating through my phone like a swarm I no longer cared to chase. They wanted a statement. They wanted spin. After the leak, those letters I'd written to myself when no one else was listening, there were calls from every corner, my agent, my publicist, sponsors asking if I'd be willing to contextualize my words, maybe appear on a late-night show to clarify the tone. Networks wondered if I might write an op-ed, something polished, forgiving, digestible, something that would smooth it all out, wrap the edges in charm, and remind people I was still the big man they could laugh with. But I didn't want to be funny. Not this time. Instead, I stepped away. Not out of shame. Out of clarity. 3 days after the footage aired, and 2 days after the letters went viral, I called every brand whose name was attached to mine, and ended the contracts. Most were stunned. A few begged me to reconsider. One flat out warned me I was damaging my legacy. But I'd finally realized the legacy they were protecting wasn't mine. It was theirs. The one they rented my face to build. I wasn't angry. I was done. I issued a short statement, not through PR but on my own feed. You loved my smile. You bought my jokes. But I won't keep selling joy while swallowing silence. I'm stepping back, not to disappear but to start speaking as myself. The world lost its breath for a minute. Then it roared. Some called it a breakdown. Others called it brave. The sports blogs used the word reckoning like it was a branding opportunity. Twitter melted into two camps. Those who said I'd finally gone woke, and those who said I'd finally grown up. But I wasn't looking to be labeled. I was trying to be whole, and being whole meant doing something I should have done long ago. Giving back in a way that wasn't built for the cameras. So I started something. It began with a single idea, scribbled in a spiral notebook, the same night Mira had asked me if I was a sellout. I'd written one word at the top of the page, misunderstood. Beneath it, I wrote, what if we invested in the voices the world keeps muting? That question became a blueprint. 2 weeks later, I launched the Misunderstood Foundation. Not just another scholarship fund with my name on the letterhead. This wasn't for star athletes. This wasn't about GPA or vertical leaps. It was for the kids who painted murals on city bridges, who wrote poems that never left their notebooks, who coded apps in public libraries while ducking gang recruiters. Kids like I used to be, big, bold, too much for the world's mold, and constantly told to tone it down or fit in. We gave the first round of grants to 12 students. Not one of them had a traditional resume. One was a spoken word artist who'd been expelled twice for disruptive language. Another was a designer who built clothes out of recycled denim and printed quiet protest messages in the lining. Every one of them had been called a problem before they'd been seen as a possibility. I met with them in person. No media, no formal event. Just a room, some pizza, and a circle of folding chairs. When I walked in, they all stood like they were meeting a myth. I told them to sit, told them I wasn't there to lecture. I was there to listen. And then I asked one question. What's something you've never been allowed to say out loud? What followed cracked me open in ways no spotlight ever had. I've been angry since I was 11. I hate pretending I'm not scared when I walk through certain neighborhoods. They always say I have potential, but never ask what I want to be. I don't want to be famous. I want to be heard. That last one landed like a punch to the chest, because I knew that feeling better than they could imagine. I left that room lighter than I'd entered it, but not because the burden was gone. Because it was finally being shared. The media, of course, dubbed it a comeback. Shaq reinvents himself, from punchlines to purpose. They tried to shape it into a story arc they could manage. But I never left. I never crumbled. I simply stopped pretending. This wasn't a rebranding. It was a return. In one interview I agreed to, an online Q&A with no fluff. Just real questions. I was asked what triggered the shift. I didn't mention the footage. I didn't mention Callan Royce, though I owed him more than he realized. I said I got tired of watching my own story be told without me. Because that's what it had always been. People told my story, spliced it, marketed it, repurposed it, but never heard it. And the moment I started reclaiming it, not with volume, but with truth, everything changed. Mira was the first to notice. You're quieter now, she said one morning, as we drove to an early breakfast. But it feels louder. I smiled. For real this time. Maybe I finally figured out how to speak without performing. She leaned her head on the window and whispered, "Took you long enough." And she was right. It had taken me decades. But the fall, stepping back, losing endorsements, facing criticism for showing up differently, it didn't destroy me. It freed me. Because I was never supposed to stay in their box forever. I was just strong enough to survive inside it, until I could build my own. The gym smelled like hope and worn sneakers. Concrete walls painted over in coats of bright blues and golds couldn't quite cover the age of the place, but the energy bouncing off them was louder than any paint ever could be. No music, no media crew, just a ball hitting the floor, the squeak of overused soles, and the kind of laughter that only comes from kids who don't yet realize how heavy the world will one day become. I stood alone by the far wall, arms crossed, watching them run drills I designed myself. No fanfare, no big-name donors, just this space, a gift I gave not for applause, but because I knew what it was like to need a room like this, and not have it. This was the third gym we'd opened, through the misunderstood foundation, but this one felt personal. We were in South Phoenix, neighborhood hit hard by broken promises and budget cuts. The kind of place where public courts get repaved once a decade, if they're lucky, and schools tighten art and sports budgets before touching anything else. The city had offered no support when we proposed to build, said it wasn't strategically sound, so we built it anyway. I didn't tell the press, didn't even alert local reporters. If someone found out, fine. But this wasn't for the cameras. This was for every kid who'd ever been told they were too loud, too much, too hard to handle. Kids like I used to be. Before the headlines, before the brand, I watched a girl named Braille sink a three-point shot like it was muscle memory. Skinny frame, torn sneakers, a fire in her eyes that didn't flinch. I asked her once why she played so hard. She said, "'Cause when I'm on the court, nobody tells me to shut up." That hit different. That stayed with me. There were 12 kids on the floor, all part of our first mentorship class. Not just athletes, poets, sketch artists, even a quiet boy who built mini drones from salvaged junkyard parts. They weren't trying to make it the way the world defines it. They were just trying to be seen, be heard, be safe. And for once I didn't feel like I had to perform. I didn't need to crack jokes to ease tension, or carry the room with charm. I could just be. And in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't said out loud. Not to the media, not to the foundation team, not even to Lucille. I never needed to be redeemed. I needed to be revealed. All those years spent managing the image, protecting the smile, deflecting the pain, bending my voice into something palatable. It wasn't about shame. It was about survival. About making sure the world didn't crush me before I could build something strong enough to hold others up. But now, standing in this gym with no mic in my hand and no corporate check behind me, I felt lighter than I had in decades. Not because the weight was gone, but because I finally understood what it had taught me. I turned toward the hallway. Footsteps light against the polished floor. At the far end, just beneath the emergency exit sign, stood Callan Royce. He hadn't announced himself. He hadn't asked for a quote or a follow-up segment. He'd simply come. He leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, watching the kids like they were telling him a story without saying a word. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just nodded once, like he understood something no one had ever explained to him, but that he now carried anyway. I walked over. "You came all this way for a quote?" I asked, keeping my tone light but curious. Callan shook his head. "No quote today. Just wanted to see it for myself." "See what?" "That you weren't trying to fix anything," he said. "You were just finally doing it your way." I looked back at the court. "Funny," I said. "That's all I ever wanted." We stood there a moment, two men from different corners of the same story. One who thought he knew how the world worked, and another who'd spent a lifetime proving that truth doesn't always wear the face people expect. "I used to think your silence was the problem," Callan said quietly. "Now I know it was the cost." I didn't respond right away. Just let that truth sit between us, heavy and warm. "I didn't come here to be a symbol," I finally said. "I came to be a man. Symbols don't get to change. Men do." He nodded again, slower this time, like something inside him was shifting. Not fully changed, not overnight, but bending, evolving. "People will still talk," he said. "Some will never get it. They don't have to," I said. "This isn't for them." I started to walk away, then turned back. Colin, when you go back out there, when the stories start piling up again, ask yourself something. He raised an eyebrow. Ask who else you've misjudged. Ask whose silence you've mistaken for safety. And then ask how loud someone had to be just to survive being ignored. His mouth twitched like he might speak, but he didn't. He just let the weight of that settle in his chest. I stepped back onto the court. The kids had moved on to free throws. Braille passed the ball to the quiet boy, Jordan, and he dribbled twice, lined up and missed wide left. The others didn't laugh. They clapped, encouraged, tried again. He smiled. I stood in the center of the court, not needing to say anything. They didn't need a speech. They didn't need a story. They just needed the space. And that's what revelation is, isn't it? Not a grand performance. Not some triumphant headline. It's truth showing up in a room where it no longer has to hide. So no, this wasn't redemption. Redemption is for the guilty. Revelation, that's for the unseen. And finally, after years of being branded, marketed, spun, and softened, I was seen. If this story made you pause, don't let it stop there. Share it with someone who's only ever seen the highlight reel. Start the conversation that doesn't end with applause. And the next time you judge a voice by its volume, ask what it had to survive just to be heard. The truth isn't always loud, but it's always worth finding.